Thank you. Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to apologize. I have this terrible cold. It's not COVID, but it's making me very miserable during the last few days. I hope you can hear me in any case. All right. So the purpose of this talk is really, first of all, to commemorate this great guy, this great scientist, Rudi Podgornik. So I see in the audience many people who, beside the two students that will talk after me, the two ex-students, there are many people who knew him personally, and of course, most of you knew his works. But there are also quite a lot of students here, so I think also for their sake, I will go into more details about Rudi. So this is Rudi. He was born 70 years ago, and unfortunately passed away last year. So I will try to give you some glimpses about his life and especially about his scientific achievements. So Rudi was born in Ljubljana in Slovenia, not so far from here. Yeah, does it work? Oh yeah, it works. So Slovenia, Austria is here. I think Vina is somewhere here. So he was born in Slovenia and did all his graduate and undergraduate and graduate studies in University of Ljubljana. And then he went on for a postdoc with Adrian Parsijan, another very well-known scientist, biophysicist at NIH, and also with Bo Johnson at University of Lund. There is here somebody also from that group. And then he became a professor of theoretical physics and biophysics at Ljubljana University, and also at the adjacent Stefan Institute. And in parallel, he continued a long-term collaboration with Parsijan Lab at NIH, and then at UMass at Amherst, and also at Eastern University in the US. So his last position was in China, actually. He took an early retirement in 2017 from Ljubljana and became a chair professor in China, had several affiliations with the Chinese Academy of Sciences, both in Beijing and later on in another institute of the academy in another city called Wenzhou. And unfortunately, as Christos mentioned, he died a few days after Christmas last year, complication of COVID. Incredible how fast he went, but that's life. So for him, life stopped at 69. He would have been 70 today. So this is a very short biography of Rudi. He was a very well-known scientist, as many of you know. He received quite a lot of awards. This is the highest award, as much as I understand, in science in Slovenia. He also, in China, he was on this very prestigious 1,000 talent plan, ex-Chinese, foreign Chinese experts, and he stayed there for 7 years till he died last year. So I was fortunate to be a colleague of him and a collaborator. We had many papers together. I think our collaboration started more than 20 years ago. And in 2016, he came as a distinguished visitor to our university, the Institute of Advanced Studies. This is a picture from then. And actually, he was supposed to come also this year, but you can make plans, but not always the plans materialize, unfortunately. So in terms of his work, I was a collaborator only on one of his main topics, but he actually was very active in several topics, and I will say a few words about each one, and then about our collaboration, I will detail this a little more. So first of all, he worked on physics of viruses, and we are going to hear more from Anje in the next talk. He also worked quite a bit. This is an earlier work with Parsijan on physics of DNA, condensed phases of DNA, and also DNA with membranes. And then Two other topics were Casimir, van der Waals type of forces, especially looking at fluctuations, interaction between various macromolecules, and the fourth topic where I was also involved in collaboration with him was charts of matter. Of course, many of the other things are also charged, but let's say more generic charge of matter, where he studied electrostatic interaction of macromolecule using all sorts of theoretical techniques and also simulation in connection with experiments. So in terms of physics of viruses, we are going to hear more from in the next talk, so I just give you here a glimpse. So viruses, of course, have many shapes, as you can see here. Some of the viruses, like the hepatitis, dengue, and some other viruses, you probably know them by name. The virus basically is a capsid. It's some type of an envelope. Usually it's a hard, solid envelope from protein, but sometimes it's also membrane, like the COVID virus. And inside you have either the RNA or the DNA genetic materials, and the virus in his own way penetrate into cells, contaminate them, replicate himself, and this is how he continues. So you can see down here the COVID. Of course, this is just an illustration. These are the corona spikes of the COVID, and in terms of a more schematic picture, so this is how it looks. You have the shell with the spike that are, the purpose of the spike is to connect to the membrane of the invading the cell that is invaded. And then inside you have the genetic material, RNA or DNA. This is schematic for the COVID virus. And in terms of course, this is a huge subject. There are lots of biologies, biomedical research that is done on viruses. Rudi was more inclined towards the physics of viruses. So he studied a lot the morphological transition of the cup of the shell and how the shell is self-assembled, and in particular taking into account the electrostatic interactions of inside the virus, because most of the ingredient, both the genetic material, the RNA, DNA, the very highly charged polyelectrolyte, and also the capsid itself is formed from proteins that are charged. And then also he looked at the interplay between electrostatic and topology in viruses. And I think Anje, who was talking after me, who was his student some years ago and continued to work on this, will give more details. In 5 years ago, Rudi, together with some collaborators, especially Roy Alzandi from University of California in Riverside, they wrote a very extended physics report review on virus growth and form. And if this title sounds familiar, I think, and I double check it with Roya, that it's alluding to the very famous book by Darcy Thompson in the beginning of the 20th century on growth and form, where he was discussing all sorts of growth and form in biology, the way that structure are evolved in biology over the years. In terms of the DNA studies, Rudi did both experiments, usually a lot of scattering and also osmotic pressure measurement. And this is a very famous work that Rudi, with collaborators, found a new phase. They called it the line excitic phase. The excitic phase is a phase that has to do with two-dimensional transitions. The line excitic, which schematically look here, has to do with a liquid crystal, one of the liquid crystal crystalline phases, where you have, of course, like any liquid crystal, you have bond orientation, long-range order in bond orientation, and nematic order, but it's liquid-like because the positional order is short range. So they found evidence for this phase, both from X-ray scattering and also complemented it with theory of Rudi and his collaborator. The other topic is about van der Waals and Casimir effect. So those of you who don't know, there is a very famous work of Casimir from 48, where basically at zero temperature and for perfect metals, mirrors in vacuum, like you see here, he predicted that there will be an attraction due to vacuum fluctuation. And this is a field theoretical type of consideration, but in very schematic way, one can understand that if you look on two metal plates, so perfect mirror for electromagnetic waves, inside, if the space is L, inside there will be less vacuum fluctuation due to the boundary condition of the two plates than outside where all vacuum fluctuation are existed, and this effectively causes a pressure from outside towards inside, and this force that Casimir calculated goes as 1 over the distance between the plates to the power 4. It was very hard to show it in experiment, but it was done much later after he made his prediction. Then, and in another pioneering work, Lifshitz, the famous Lifshitz from Moscow, in 54, he extended this type of consideration to finite temperature and to dielectric, to real material, not only to perfect metals. And actually, and this is a book, a rather recent book, 10 or 15 years ago book by Parsijan, where he discusses all these type of topics. And in terms of Rudi's contribution, Rudi used a lot the Lifshitz-like theory, the field theoretical approach, and he calculated this thermal fluctuation-induced interaction in various type of concrete materials, in liquid crystal, in polymers, in membranes, graphene, nano devices, and so on. And also he also applied the Casimir effect to wetting and de-wetting transition of liquid on top of solid surfaces. There are two reviews that he wrote, of course, together with collaborators. I listed them here, one in 15 years ago in 2010, and another one in 2016, where basically he discusses the Casimir and van der Waals type of interaction, but more specifically inside materials. And I think this was his main contribution, to look on specific material, specific dielectrics, and to see how this Casimir and van der Waals interaction are affecting the material. The last but not least is electrostatic in a more broader sense in soft condensed matter, which is actually the topic of this workshop. So I would like to remind you of a very famous work of Sam Edwards, a famous British physicist, who actually in the late 50s, beginning of 60s, this is an article from 62, he was, to my best of my knowledge, one of the first to apply field theoretical approach that was invented in quantum field theory to Coulombic system, where you have long-range Coulombic interaction. And so this was done for a one-dimensional system, but using functional integration approach, which is very standard in field theoretical system. And the other thing I would like to mention is a work that I like a lot of Rudi. This is something that Rudi did towards the end of his PhD in 88. And together with one of his supervisor, Boschan Jacques, they studied inhomogeneous Coulombic fluid and applied it to the surface tension that I'm going to talk about it between an electrolyte and vacuum, because you have profile of ions close to the interface and you need to do a inhomogeneous field theory to account for that. I will get back to that later. So in general, I would say that there are several things that Rudi did on the electrostatic in soft matter in biophysics. The first thing that goes a lot in his work, although he was on one hand very formal, but on the other hand very much connected to experiments, And he went beyond the Poisson-Boltzmann treatment, which is a standard mean field treatment of charged system, charged bodies immersed in a liquid. And then he looked a lot about strongly coupled Coulombic fluid using field theoretical approach. I think that Natasha, who was Rudi's student, will elaborate more on, I think she will work on her, she will talk on something that she did recently, but more on this type of approach that she was doing with Rudi some years ago. The other thing, and this is something that I'm going to talk about, is to reformulate surface tension, the famous work of Onsager and Samaras, and to include ionic specific effects, which goes by the name of Hofmeister series. And the last thing is charge regulations. So the pioneering work here is by Barry Needham and Adrian Parsegian in the early 70s. And Rudi applied the charge regulation not only to surfaces, which was done by Needham and Parsegian, but to many types of biophysical and soft matter system, colloids, polyelectrolytes, membrane, and so on, and also viruses. I'm going to give you some glimpses about some recent work that we did together. So in terms of electrostatics, there are two edited books that he was involved in. One is this Lesouche school in 24 years ago. It was a very, very nice school, and this is the edited proceeding of the conference. And Rudi, together with Christian and Patrick, they edited this. It was very instructive to many of my students. The other one that he did more recently with Jure and Ali Nagy, Yuri Dobniker and David Dean, is also about similar topic, but of course, some years later. And finally, we also wrote a big chapter about charge membrane, and it was published a few years ago together with Rudi and one of my students at the time. We discussed a lot the Poisson-Boltzmann interactions in membranes and some work about going beyond the Poisson-Boltzmann, the classical things. Okay, so this I sort of try to give you a glimpse about many of Rudi's works. I hope without doing too much injustice to many of his contributions. And now I would like to concentrate. Can you tell me how much time do I have? 10 minutes. So I would like to just to give you some examples instead of just talking with a lot of hand waving. Just some example of some concrete things that we did together. I have two examples. Maybe I will be able only due to the time restriction, to go only into one. The first one is something that we did together with my student at the time, Tomer Markovic, and this is to look again at the very famous work of Onsager. You can read about it in Landau and Lifshitz, about surface tension of electrolytes. Very simple type of consideration, but given that it was done 90 years ago, 10 years after the famous Debye and Haeckel work in the 20s on electrolyte, at the time it was very pioneering, although it doesn't include everything, of course. So what is the problem? The problem, as I'm stating here very simply, and you can find it in the paper or in Landau and Lifshitz, where it's much simplified, is the following. You have an interface. Let's say, think of salty water, sea water, separating the interface, separating the water from the air, the vapor, whatever. So you have a dielectric discontinuity when you consider the fluid, the water, to be a continuous dielectric. So the dielectric constant of water is very high, 80. Of vacuum or for air, it's about 1. And so you have a dielectric discontinuity at this interface. And now imagine that you take one ion, doesn't matter if it's a cation or anion, and you bring it close to the interface. If you want to solve the electrostatic problem, and this is sort of freshman physics type of problem, one ion close to an interface, you have to satisfy the dielectric boundary condition. So in this type of geometry, it's very easy to use image charges. So image charge in this case, the ion is in the high dielectric media, so the image charge will have the same sign as the real ion. And you can replace the interface by just considering the interaction between the ion and its image charge. So electrostatic interaction, Coulomb, 1 over R interaction, and it's repulsive because the two ions have the same sign. So this, in a very hand-waving way, but it's really exact way, I just explained that ions are repelled from an interface with a lower dielectric constant. And this is a well-known thing. It's causing the seawater surface tension to be higher than the fresh water, the pure water surface tension. So you can see here, this is a plot of the ion concentration. So you will have some depletion of the ion, which will cause an increase in the surface tension from the interface with air to the bulk value, which is inside. Of course, all this phenomena is very, very short range. It happened about, like a nanometer or something like that. But it's enough to cause this effect that I'm talking about. So there is this depletion. There are no other ions on the interface. If there are other ions like surfactant, the whole problem changes. It's becoming a sort of a different problem. And what Onsager and Samaras did, without entering into the detail, they actually started with such an interaction which causes a 1 over R repulsive interaction of ions that are close to the interface. And they added to this the well-known at the time, the bi-Haeckel theory of electrolyte, because you don't have only one ion, you have many ions, and you don't consider only the ion surface, but you have to consider interaction between all types of pairs of ions. So altogether, they calculated it, and they found this very famous result, where the surface tension increased. So delta gamma is an increase in surface tension. I don't take into account the surface tension of pure water, it's just the effect of the ion. So the surface tension is very simple. There is some coefficient, kT, thermal energy, we set the energy scale, n log n, where n is the bulk concentration of ions. And you see that this result doesn't depend on whether I make the consideration with cation or anion. It's the same for both. But it will depend on the valency of the ion, because n goes as a Debye length to the power -2, and in the Debye length, of course, if you have multivalent ion, it will be different. The main thing that is important beside this very neat and elegant result is that there is no specificity of the ion, and this is a point that I'm going to talk a little bit more. So I want to go back now to the result of Rudi and his advisor, Jacques. And in 1988, what they did is using this field theoretical approach inspired by Sam Edwards, they were able to reproduce Onsager-Samaras result. Onsager-Samaras did it in a very different way, and they were in a very elegant way, they were able to reproducing using field theoretical approach, doing what is called a loop expansion. So you are doing some expansion around in field, taking into account fluctuation in a more precise way, and stopping at the first correction, which is the one loop expansion. They got exactly the Onsager-Samaras result. But if you look on experiments, you can see that this is the Onsager-Samaras result. You see this is the salt, and I have here several experimental results with several salt, all of them with sodium, but the anion can vary. You see between fluorine, chlorine, bromine, iodine. But you see that only here the results are are sort of in agreement, but then the result of Onsager-Samaras deviate a lot. And also what you see is that there is this spread of the different type of anions, and this spread is very significant because it goes hand in hand with what is called the Hofmeister series of ions. So all of these ions are single valent, and it means that it's not only electrostatics that pay into account, but there are other things. So the Hofmeister series is exactly a series where you can see that the fluorine, in this case, contribute more to the surface tension than chlorine, bromine, and iodine. And this is exactly in the same order as you have in the Hofmeister series. So the Hofmeister series was not done by surface tension. It was done by Hofmeister, who was a German pharmacologist some 150 years ago. So all these results were known to Debye and to Onsager, and basically he did this result on coagulation of egg albumin protein, and this is a series that he found, and you see that this type of series is, you can see it here, the partial series that I was discussing. Now, what we did with Rudi and with my student, but also there are also some other people who worked analytically on similar issues and calculated surface tension, we try to include in a cell-consistent field theory, we try to include also the surface-ion interaction, which goes beyond the Onsager-Samaras. And we were able, by one parameter, it's a phenomenological parameter called alpha, we call it adhesivity. We were able, by this parameter, to model the surface tension increase and separate two analytical terms. One is exactly the Onsager-Samaras, which doesn't take into account this alpha, and the other is an ion-specific term, which is not less important than the Onsager-Samaras and give nice correction to the Onsager-Samaras when you compare to experiments. So this is also one loop expansion, and without too many of the details, you can see that this is the Onsager-Samaras result. This is the n log n that I was talking before, this with that, and the coefficient goes, depend on the contrast between the dielectric constant of air, 1, and epsilon of water. And this is another other term that has this alpha inside, and it's effectively telling you that you have some effective surface charge or effective depletion due to this alpha. And the fit that you see here actually are fits from our result, where here you can see this alpha, and the alpha is very reasonable because it's a fraction of kT depending on the type of anion. And so this is the fit with the alpha, and for the ionic size, we took the known ionic sizes of all these ions. And we also were able to calculate the profile. So you can see here the profile of the anions and the cations with two different values of these alphas. So you see, and all the action happens up to, let's say, 2 nanometer or so, but this is enough to cause the effect. Okay, I think that I will not have time to go through that, so I just will say that we have many works, but Rudi also had many other works, not only with me and my group, on charge regulation. So we looked here on polyelectrolyte gels and the phase transition due to charge regulation. I think some other people will talk about charge regulation, so I'm skipping that because I would like to say a few more words about Rudi. It will take me 3 minutes. So why was Rudi so special? You know, I showed you some of his details about his life and about his achievement. But for those of us who knew him, I think one of the things that was very special about him was this combination of very theoretical approach to, you know, very mathematical oriented, very analytical approach, these field theoretical studies, Lifshitz-like theory or Coulombic field theoretical are very heavy in terms of the approach. But on the other hand, he was very much in contact with experimentalists, and it was very important for him to understand and to relate to experiment, exactly like the topic of your workshop. And of course, also with simulation in his group, and his collaborator did a lot of simulation. And actually, because he was such a star of knowledge, many people were attracted to him, and he had all these different collaboration all over the world. And I was fortunate to be one of them, but he had many more. And for those of us who knew him, knew also that he had an encyclopedia knowledge about almost everything. Literature. In recent years, he went very much into Chinese study, history. He learned Chinese and all sorts of things. And also, he enjoyed life. He enjoyed good food and wine, and it was really a pleasure to be with him. One of his famous phrases for people who work with him was, when we were about to submit a paper, he would say, "Ship that baby out." So this was nice. And he liked very much hats and caps, and he gave me one also. So you can see here a collection. one more, and one more. This is taken in Petra in Jordan. So very fortunately, now that I think about it, you probably will agree, Anje and Natasha, that 2 years ago we decided, the students and collaborators from Ljubljana decided to have a conference. Due to COVID, it was delayed. It was supposed to be for his 65th birthday, and we had a wonderful conference in Ljubljana in, by the day, August 27, 2 years ago. And you can see the photo with many of his collaborators and students, and he's in the middle there. Somebody, I don't know who took this picture. This is a very nice picture because Svetina and Zhek were his two supervisors. They are still alive, and they are in their 80s, of course. And they came to the conference, and it's a beautiful picture of the three of them together. And another very nice picture is the one with his 5 students. So he had 5 students. 2 of them are represented here. You see they have this red dot over their head, and I'm sure they will talk also about him and about the work. And there were Matei, there are 2 Matei and Jure. They are the other 3 students that you can see. This is also a picture taken at this place. Finally, I would like to mention, for those of you who would like to enjoy hearing him talking about his science and his life for 1 hour, so there is an interview taken by Shige Komura, who is a professor at the Manju Institute 3 years ago. And you don't have to memorize this long YouTube. You just look on Google or on YouTube, Podgornik Manju, and you will find it immediately. And I just want to give you a glimpse of that. I'm sorry. Okay, I'm not sure if you can hear it. Okay, so this goes on. It's a nice interview where he talks about his life in Yugoslavia at the time and how he went into life with all sorts of things, beautiful thing. So I want just to end by raising a sort of virtual toast to Rudi. He's not with us anymore. Great scientist, a wonderful friend, and a real great humanist. This is a picture from the 2 of us at NIH about 20-something years ago. And I was fortunate enough to see him 2 months before he died in Gwangju. I was there, and I'm very fortunate to have this memory with him 2 months before his unexpected death. So, great scientist, great friend. He would greatly be missed, and I hope that I was able to convey a little bit from his life and his life as a gentleman of science, I would say. Thank you so much.